Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Over the past week, 2 people have died while in custody of our city's Department of Correction. On Sunday, a detainee died at Bellevue Hospital, an incident that is still under investigation, although no foul play is suspected. Days earlier, a transgender woman, 27-year-old Layleen Polanco, was found dead in her cell on Rikers. That case also remains under investigation. Polanco's death in particular has sparked outrage and shines a new focus on conditions inside the city's jail system. Here now to talk about this is a special panel. Insha Rahman is the Director of Strategy and New Initiatives at the Vera Institute of Justice, a prominent research and policy organization. And Stanley Richards is the Executive Vice President of the advocacy group, the Fortune Society. Thank you both for being here. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Let me just start with, when they say no foul play is suspected, but we also hear that in the case of Layleen Polanco, that she was in solitary confinement. I know, according to international conventions and solid psychological and medical research, solitary confinement is, in some cases, considered a form of torture, right? It is not just being locked alone in a room.
Yeah, absolutely. And so maybe there was no foul play as we traditionally think of it, but the fact of solitary confinement itself is a situation that leaves people who are perhaps already vulnerable, like Ms. Polanco was, even more vulnerable. You know, it's a problem that this young woman died in custody. It's especially a problem that she died in solitary confinement, where she was supposed to be under special supervision of the Department of Correction. That sort of adds insult to injury of the fact of the circumstances of her death.
Right.
And we have to be mindful what we're talking about. We're talking about 23 hours being locked in a day. We're talking about being shackled anywhere you go whenever you need to travel because you're in enhanced restraints. Solitary confinement is leaves people isolated, and as Ansha said, traumatic. It's a traumatic experience.
And when we've talked about this in the past, we've talked about this with union members, we've talked about this with officials, there's been an argument that I think has been settled that it can't be used, solitary confinement, punitively. It can't be used simply to punish someone. What are non-punitive reasons that would make sense as far as you're concerned?
Well, one of the things we've been doing as a Board of Correction, we've been looking at and revising the way solitary confinement happens. Over the years, we eliminated solitary confinement for adolescents. We have created alternative restrictive housing for young people so that it's not punitive seg, where they're out 10 hours or they're out 7 hours, where they are engaged in services, and where there's opportunity for them to reflect on the infraction they had. We need to do that for the adults as well. We know the punishment doesn't work. Isolating people for 23 hours a day doesn't work. And we are now in the middle of rulemaking for solitary confinement or restrictive housing overall. And our hope is that we get to a place where people are still able to come out of their cell and engage in services, where we could separate people from general pop for their own safety or the safety of others, but we're not punishing people and we're not brutalizing people through isolation.
If something is going on, Stanley Richards, and families sense that the situation is not safe, detainees sense that the situation is not safe, what kind of, for lack of a better word, customer service is there? Who do complaints go to, and with what speed would they be handled?
That's a great question. I sit on the Board of Correction. I was appointed by the City Council. If anybody has complaints about a loved one that's incarcerated or detained in Rikers or in the borough facilities, they can call the BOC, Board of Correction. We have monitors who are assigned to every facility on Rikers, including the borough houses and the courthouses. We receive a complaint, we will investigate. We will go and look and see to make sure that the Department of Correction is abiding by the rules we set as standards of care.
Is there a possibility of a quick turnaround on that? Like someone says, look, you know, I talked with my husband and I heard screaming and violence in the background. Can they call you and something can happen within hours?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It'll be assigned to a monitor, and a monitor would go and look into that particular case to, one, make sure that that person is safe, and two, make sure that if DOC is in violation of any of our rules, that that rule is immediately rectified and cleared up.
One of the background policy issues here that we often hear is that the Department of Correction is not equipped, the personnel are not equipped to deal with the number of people with mental and emotional issues that are going to be presented to them.
Yep.
There's a possibility that that was at work in either or both of these cases, right?
Yep.
What's the answer to that?
So the answer to that, and I want to touch on something Stanley said, which is we have taken great strides in New York City to actually reduce the use of solitary confinement, to create alternatives to solitary. But the truth is the fact of isolating somebody, which is by definition what solitary is punishment. There is no way to actually take that out of what we're doing. And what we know from what history has told us, what research has showed us, is that solitary confinement isolating people does not work. For people with mental health issues, with behavioral health issues, with histories of trauma, or even histories of violence, taking them out of society, away from relationships and connections and care, actually makes the problem worse. And so here's what we need to do fundamentally is we need to transform how we think of incarceration so that it isn't punishment. The punishment is losing your liberty, but the circumstances of your incarceration should not be such that it actually exacerbates existing trauma or medical issues or mental health issues. And so what's the fundamental solution to that? One thing is to actually make a commitment to really say we are going to use solitary confinement much less than we do. In fact, we can actually eliminate its use. There are places even around the country. Colorado has gone so close to actually eliminating the use of solitary, and the justification is usually, well, we need it for disciplinary issues. We need it to manage populations. But we know that there are examples of other ways to manage it, and the way to do that is with therapeutic care, with mental health services, treatment, not just more control, not more isolation.
That's right. And the other solution to that is to do what we've been doing over the years, is reduce the number of people who belong there. In both the situations, Laleen and Jose's situation, both of those folks should not have even been in our criminal justice system. Laleen had a $500 bail. She should not have been in the system. And Jose was facing a parole violation. And parole is one of the populations that we've seen as every other population has been coming down in terms of incarceration. Parole is the only one going up. So we need to take a look at not only the conditions, but we need to look at the front door, because we're at a place now where we don't need to incarcerate so many people. We have communities that are safe. We ought to be reducing the number of people. We ought to be taking the money we're spending, the billions we're spending in incarcerating people, and reinvest it in those communities.
In fact, yeah, I want to dwell on that for just a second. Parole violation. You serve a term in prison. You've been convicted. You've committed a crime. You've served your sentence. And then you come out and you're on parole, meaning you have to check in with someone and there's still some form of supervision. Yeah. However, if you violate those conditions, and that can be missing an appointment, having a dirty urine, associating with people, being out past your curfew or something like that, the parole officer can order you back in. And that is one of the big drivers of people coming back into Rikers, right?
Absolutely.
Now, those decisions are not generally public or even subject to review, are they?
That's right, because the criminal case has already been handled. So a parole violation is an administrative process according to the way the state handles it. And part of what we have been advocating for is a set of legislation called less is more, that will change the way parole violations happen. It would take away, as punishment for technical violations, the need to incarcerate people. It would put controls in, if you violate somebody, that they go through due process, that they don't necessarily get while they're on parole violations now, but they would go through due processes.
Yeah. Okay. And it's basically an issue of culture change, right? We've actually seen in New York City a huge shift in culture in terms of policing, in terms of the courts and the use of bail. Where I don't think we've actually seen any real shift is in the use of parole and technical parole violations, and we need to really sort of push on that as well as do the legislative fix.
Okay, a number of important issues behind these two troubling cases. Thank you so much for coming by to talk with me tonight. Let's take a short break here.